Hey, good Friday evening, everybody. I am Chief Meteorologist Dave Turley here, along with the First Alert Weather team. We got Cutter Martin over here, Andrew Gordon over here, and we got Jamie Ertl over here on this side.
You said you were going to wear your hat.
I'll put it back on. You didn't have it, so I changed my mind. I panicked.
Oh, you do have a hat on. I didn't even notice you had a hat on.
I panicked.
We hope you enjoyed watching our WTOC Storm Ready 2018 that aired on WTOC. And right now we're going to be taking some of your questions and talk a little bit more about some hurricane stuff. We call this our WTOC Storm Watch 2018 question and answer. So, again, we're going to start out recapping, again, watching what we just showed you out there. Yeah. And we want to make sure that you are just basically prepared. If you have any questions or comments, go to our WTOC Facebook page. I know you're watching either on our Roku app or Amazon Fire TV or WTOC.com, or if you're on our Facebook page, that's where you have to go to leave a question, leave a comment. And we see it scrolling here, so we're going to get to your questions and comments as much as we can. And we got a couple of questions that we're going to be kind of relating to ourselves, kind of answering ourselves as well. Yeah. So let's get into what we had out there. We had the busy season kind of in the forecast here, kind of a slightly maybe above average season coming up here. And we are looking forward to the future and want to make sure that you are having some great information with that. We're going to start out with Cutter right now, who's got some questions out there.
Yeah, I just asked on Facebook a little earlier and on Twitter just, hey, do you have any questions and related to our area hurricane season? I did get a couple specific questions. I'm just going to read them off of my phone, and then I'm going to give you an answer. We have some graphics involved in here. I think that'll better help answer the question, maybe more so than just words would. So I'm going to be pulling up some of these questions, going to answer these. Of course, additional questions coming in. We have these questions live streaming right now. We're going to go back through, answer these as well. And, of course, what we don't get, you can go to our individual Facebook pages, I'm sure, and ask us those. So we did get a couple of questions specifically relating to certain risks depending on location in the area, and I did get one out of Effingham County, and that question was, is their area, specifically Guyton, at risk for storm surge flooding? That was one question that I got. And going back to the very first one, though, do most hurricanes happen in the fall, and if so, why? This is from Jimmy Clark, Canucci Creek. That's his Twitter handle. It's a great question. And I told him, it really depends on exactly where you're located and how that, can determine your greatest risk. So for us here locally, Jimmy, if you're watching right now, that is definitely true for us. Fall season, we're looking at September here into October. And why is that? We're going to get into a little bit of science here, but think about the fall season. Think about cold fronts moving through, dips in the jet stream. We start having cooler weather, and it's those features that tends to draw these systems northward or poleward towards the North Pole from the deep tropics. So on a westbound direction, they do tend to move off to the north here. And this is from the National Hurricane Center, NOAA, kind of the big umbrella group there. And it can kind of show you September, October, certainly our time to watch as we do get into the fall season. These tend to turn northward, possibly northeastward. Let's think about Matthew, and let's think about Irma. They were on a westward heading and then took a sharp turn to the north, so the East Coast was more impacted. So the East Coast in particular does tend to be more impacted in the fall because of all the other climate mechanisms out there helping to pull these more northward rather than going westward into Mexico or the Gulf of Mexico as we get into that time of season. Question number 2, why is the month chosen to be hurricane season? Why couldn't it be during the fall? And this was actually coming in from Sarah Sebastian on, this was on Facebook. And I think she, just to clarify here, hurricane season starts today, June 1st, but it goes through November 30th. So we're talking about an extended period of time here, and here's why. Again, this too from the NOAA Group, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and this is kind of a peak, a display of the peak of hurricane season here. And notice when the peak is, and this is no coincidence here. We're talking about the first week or two of September. Typically, water's at their warmest during that time. Tropical thunderstorm activity at its greatest during that time near the equator. We need those waves of energy to roll off of of Africa and possibly form areas of low pressure becoming hurricanes. So all of the ingredients for hurricanes that we need to get them are at their peak or their most ripe during that August to September time period. That is why we tend to have here in our hemisphere our active hurricane season during the September, October periods, as well as August. Of course, in the southern hemisphere, it's essentially opposite because they are in their summer when we are in our winter. So hopefully that kind of lays it out for you. Again, if you have any additional questions, you can reach out to me on Facebook. And lastly, a question. I don't have a graphic for this one, but this is from Haley, not Haley7 on Twitter. I live in Hinesville, Little Wissey area and was wondering, does it usually get bad enough in those areas to the point of evacuation or flooding? Just wondering how far inland it really affects. Thanks. First of all, thank you for asking that question, and I want to let you know hundreds of miles inland, even 1,000 miles, you can certainly be impacted by tropical systems. Hurricane Ike in 2008 produced damaging winds in Indiana, Ohio. We've seen many examples. Alberto just now produced heavy rain.
94, Alberto 18.
Yeah. Exactly. You know, so many examples of these far inland events that cause issues. So you're certainly close enough to the coast to be impacted. But what I would say to her is storm surge flooding. We're not going to worry about that in Hinesville, Little Wissey, but we're talking rainfall flooding, isolated tornadoes, and certainly the risk of damaging to destructive winds. But it all depends on how strong that system is.
We got a question coming up here. Again, if you have a question or a comment, you can leave it on our WTOC Facebook page. This one is coming in from Heather Brannon. She says, do I have time to update my insurance? And that's a great question. Anytime that there is a named tropical system or into the Atlantic Basin, you cannot be updating any type of insurance out there. So now's the time, while it's relatively quiet out there. I think it takes about 30 days officially to get that policy into effect out there. So while it's quiet, usually want to get this done before hurricane season, because we already saw what happened with Alberto or just before hurricane season. But yeah, now is to be a good time while it's pretty quiet out there in the beginning of a hurricane season, which Cutter just mentioned starts on June 1st.
Rich Evans is, okay, Rich, let's talk about maybe lessons learned, but, you know, SEMA, Rich says, let's not evacuate, let's not pull the trigger as fast as we did with Irma. But I think SEMA, with lessons learned from Matthew, I think they did it the right way. When you have a Category 3 possibly barreling toward your coastline, you got to pull that trigger. You got to think about the evacuation plan. And so they did scale back, and I know the governor did get involved, but that is his place. He can do so. But I think they did it right last year.
I think it's better to be safe than sorry. You just don't know with a lot of these systems out there, and it's a big task really trying to get everybody on board and have the same message when you're all looking at the same weather information that's coming down with the computer models and saying, where's the storm going to go? And if you're emergency management, I mean, you got to make that decision, which impacts a lot of people's lives. Right. And do you go cautious, or do you say, hey, we're going to make sure and get out ahead of it and make sure we get people safe? And I think they did a great job with that last year.
For sure. Well, I guess one thing we can talk about real quick is just kind of the prediction for this year's season, 2018 Atlantic season. This is a story that I kind of looked into, and if you just watched the special, you know that. But they're forecasting near to just slightly above average. That's the researchers at Colorado State, as well as NOAA. But I wouldn't really focus too much on numbers of named storms, hurricanes, major hurricanes, because you can have one hurricane in a season. If it impacts our area, it was a bad season for you. So I don't think it should really focus so much on if it's going to be above average, below average, because it only really just takes one. Another thing that I have been focusing on here over the past couple of weeks is that tornado threat that comes with these tropical systems. Now, over the past few years, most of those tornadoes have been out of our area, which is good news for us, because that just takes away one of the threats. A lot of them have been out in the Atlantic, and hopefully it stays that way again. But in 2016, Hermine had EF1 in Liberty County and Chatham County. So with these storms, especially on the right front quadrant of them, you can definitely get isolated tornadoes. Now with that, typically they're weaker, and they're not always weaker, but typically they're weaker. But that's just another reason to pay attention to what's going on, because you might not be dealing with storm surge, but tornadoes can happen over 100 miles away from the center of circulation of a tropical system and a hurricane. So that's just something else to keep in mind going ahead to this season.
And to piggyback on what you were saying there about it only taking one storm and not to focus on how many, if you go back to the year Hurricane Andrew hit southern areas of Florida. I believe there's only about 5 or 6 named storms that whole season, I believe. One of them just happened to be, Major Hurricane Andrew, and you saw the devastation. That's the true epitome of just takes one.
Yeah, I mean, the A storm, it was an August storm. Imagine having a hurricane season where you don't have anything named until August. I'm seeing an interesting question come in here, and this is from Rich Evans. And again, talking about SEMA's call last year and evacuating towards the hurricane path, and he has disagreement with that. Of course, we all have opinions, and as residents, it's hard. You have jobs, you have kids, you have so many obligations that require you to maintain those. You have this wrench thrown at you that you have any control over. I get that it's hard, but the thing to remember here is, remember how the path was focused on us and the evacuation was called, the path shifted. A lot of folks chose to go to Atlanta. They chose to go to Albany, and that path took what remained of the center of circulation through that area. But we have to remember, the reason for evacuation is not because of wind, not because of tornadoes, it's storm surge. So even though you went to Atlanta, and you may see that pretty little red line going through that area, and maybe it scares you a little bit, the reason for evacuation is storm surge. That is a threat that we had, that Columbus, Albany, Birmingham, all the Alabama cities, and Atlanta did not have. So it may have seemed like you were driving into more danger, but in reality, the primary reason for evacuation, water, that threat was not present in those areas. So just another factor to consider when forming those opinions about last year, just something to consider.
Brittany Nicole wonders, is this still a tropical storm? And I'm assuming she means Alberto. Alberto is no more, but it did, interestingly enough, make it all the way to Lake Michigan, which is the farthest a tropical depression has ever made it into the United States, in the northern tier of the United States. So, impressive. And I want to reiterate, every storm is different. So, when we retire major storms because of damage and whatnot, I did actually have a question. Why is still Alberto out there when 94 was so bad? I had friends living in Macon, and the Rose Hill Cemetery caskets were popping up out of the ground. The flooding was tremendous. Americus got more than 20 inches.
It was 26. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, so maybe you can chime in, but they wondered why it wasn't retired.
They didn't start retiring names until after that storm.
Okay,
I believe it was within a few years after that. I don't know the exact year, but from my understanding, they hadn't started doing it yet.
Okay.
So.
And Irma is retired, so I think we have
Harvey. I think
Harvey's
probably
retired.
I would bet that would be
Maria's
yes.
retired. And the new I is now Aida or something like that.
Something along those lines.
Yes.
Is it really?
Yes, it's something weird. There'll never be a Jamie. I know that.
Every 6 years they rotate these names, I believe.
Yeah.
Eventually
Every
they'll run
6
out.
years.
Yeah, eventually, maybe.
You think they'll have a cutter?
No. They might have
might.
Thomas.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, David was the last one to hit Savannah, and that's the one that's been retired, so there'll never be another David.
No more Andrew. That was 92 August. That's what we were just talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of folks have really great questions here, and I just want to remind folks, if you're still thinking about any questions that you may have, or maybe you missed this special and you're kind of joining us, because I know it's easy to watch on Facebook, it's a Friday evening. A lot of this is going to be put online. We're going to be kind of cutting up the chunks of the special, posting it to WTOC.com. Also, WTOC.com/knowyourrisk can help break down your specific risk county by county. That's just something that the team has been kind of working on for the past few weeks, and we'll continue to update you, not only tonight. This is not a one-night sort of conversation. If you have any questions at home, feel free to always reach out to us on our various social media accounts, WTOC Jamie Ertel, WTOC Dave Turley, Andrew Gorton, and myself, as well as Ron Wallace, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Brian Gosnell wants to know how much wind a tree can sustain, depending on the tree, but in a general question.
That is tough.
That's unanswerable.
Well, go ahead.
All I was going to say is, we've seen big trees fall over quicker than some smaller trees because they're rotted out inside. You might not know that. Yeah. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis. And from what I understand, pine trees and some other trees that are native to this area have shallower root systems. So
Water oaks.
Yeah, and if you've got an inch of rain that comes down and then followed by maybe some stronger wind over 30, 40 miles an hour, that's probably, borderline. I don't know exactly that there's a threshold, but...
That's what I was actually thinking of too. It depends if there's a lot of rain out there, the roots will become loose, and it does not can take as much for the tree to go down. But maybe you're talking about is how much does it take for a tree to get snapped in half, and it really depends on the tree as well. You're talking about some of the dry rot in there that you might not see, but we had tornadoes with 65 to 85 mile per hour winds at EF0 tornado. that went through the Scriven area that took down some trees, knocked them in half. So, I mean, it's not going to take much.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's certainly about hurricane force, 70, 4 miles per hour. So.
Matthew took trees down in Bowling County.
Hermine even,
Yeah.
knocked down trees. And I have a really random story here, but Hurricane Rita in 2005, in the subdivision next to us, there was a home that had it unfortunately burned down. This was before the hurricane. The trees were saved; they were healthy, but there was a little bit of a burn scar. But they thought they were fine. And then Hurricane Rita came through, and we only had 50 to 70 mile an hour gusts, which considering it could have been a lot worse. But every single one of their large 6 pine trees snapped because there was just enough damage to weaken. But on the outside, you don't necessarily realize that. Exactly what you were saying, the health of that tree.
Yeah. So let's just say hi to everybody who's basically commenting. We got Cody, hello to you, and Kira. Tracy says it's getting rough here in Sylvania. We've been watching some storms, which we'll be tracking here throughout the evening hours. Patrice, hello. Elaine, Vicky. Rich says, let's see who else doesn't have a life. Hello to you, Rich. Claudette.
Glad you're still watching.
Yes, we're glad you're
I
watching.
like Rich. I do. He's got a dry sense of
I
humor.
like that. That was funny.
All right.
What else you want to say here?
Got the insurance, and then
Yeah, that's.
I mean that's the insurance is a good question, and I tell you what, it may cost in the beginning, but the coverage that I had with Matthew was amazing. So get the right people, get the right coverage, and when and if it finally happened, we were just taken care of completely. It was amazing. Because I hear about the deductibles and whatnot. Make sure you take a look at that and all the gobbledygook that's in your contract.
There's a lot of stuff that people, a little fine print that most of us, unless you're in the insurance business, we're not going to understand what that is. You think you have insurance, you think you're good to go, but sometimes that's not always the case.
Yeah.
So you would say, after your Matthew ordeal and what you went through and stuff, that totally, even if it's a burden initially, totally paid off?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
awesome.
That's a really good question.
What you got?
Courtney says, does Savannah's position protect us from a direct hit?
Ooh, they like the curve.
Yeah.
It's the curve of our coastline.
Right.
Nothing.
We did a story on that, the hurricane special. Off the top of my head, 1893 killed 2,000 people in Beaufort County alone.
Yeah.
Actually, more than 2,000. And 1959, Gracie, David. There are examples. Our strike,
Island.
yeah, exactly. Our strike return frequency, the amount of years on average, the gap between strikes of a hurricane direct is higher here. We don't get them as often direct hits. But to say that we're necessarily protected, and maybe a little bit harder, but Mother Nature has a way of working around those obstacles.
It all depends if the winds are right, where things are forming, and how they're coming in. I mean, certainly anything is possible. We are not immune, and it really has nothing to do with the curvature of the coast, but it just happens to do what the wind patterns are at the time as the storm is moving into the area, really.
Yeah, I remember
how it's steering it.
And I remember seeing some crazy, footage of last hurricane season of just water kind of taken out of bays because of the wind. And I feel like on the opposite effect could happen. The wind could push water in up the rivers.
Was that Tampa
There was
Bay
one in
that
Tampa
came
Bay,
in?
and there's one in the Caribbean somewhere where people were out there walking and the
Yes.
water came back
Remember that.
pretty quickly. So definitely something, you can have that opposite effect. It could take it out, but it could also bring it in at a higher rate as well.
Hi, Marie Wright Rowe. How you doing?
Yes, hello.
Hey, no, Marie.
From the borough.
And, just looking ahead to this hurricane season, I just think it's interesting how a lot of the questions I've been getting also just kind of throughout the hurricane seasons here, are the number of storms increasing? Is it busier? And it's kind of a hard question to answer because there are so many factors. And I think we actually are more vigilant than we used to be simply because the science is better. We have satellite. We have all those things to keep an eye on.
You get to
on
read
these
that out
systems.
loud.
Yeah, read that one.
Let's see. How can you call it a tropical storm when it doesn't bring coconuts, bananas, or pina coladas? I don't know.
Well, maybe just
It's-
get them ahead of time. Stock up.
You could always,
Hurricane party.
yeah.
Unless you're
If
supposed
you're
to
in not
evacuate,
an
right?
evacuation zone, and you can do
Yes,
so
you
safely.
don't want to do that. Yeah, exactly.
And, you made me think of a good story, Jamie. My grandma, she never had flood insurance. She was not, I don't know if she was technically in a flood zone, and I'm putting her on the spot. Hopefully she's not watching this.
No,
but
Grandma.
her neighborhood's protected by a levee. But and during Harvey, the levee had a failure, and they had to emergency evacuate everybody out. She did not have flood insurance before that. Immediately after that, thankfully, her home did not flood. But she immediately went out and got insurance, and she's like, it's literally a weight off your shoulders.
yeah.
Even if you have to, cut that check every month,
Right.
you have that form of protection. It's just another level of protection aside from everything else we talk about.
A little bit of peace of mind, I
Yeah,
guess.
absolutely.
Emily has a great question. She says, are there any changes to evacuation routes, and where can we find this info? I don't think there's any changes to the routes that we know of for this upcoming season. The only thing that's really changed is who has to evacuate here for parts of Chatham County. They kind of redid the zones. We got zone, is it A, B, and C? Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So if you're east of the Truman, you're in zone A. From the Truman to the 95 is zone B, and then anything after that is going to be zone C. And they'll have evacuations according to that. But the routes are going to be the same.
And in Beaufort County, I don't think it's really changed so much either. And as far as the part of the question, where can we find this information? We do have quite a bit of this posted to WTOC.com. We're actually kind of relaunching, remodeling, if you will, our hurricane page, our hurricane center page, and it's going to be debuted here within the next week, and all of that condensed information is going to be placed there on that website. And a lot of Googling too, and sometimes even just calling your local emergency management office. And a lot of those folks, as we saw today at our Hurricane Ready event, are so easy to talk to and willing to share that information.
For sure.
People talking about the rain coming down in our western counties right now, and should be over pretty soon, actually. But we're going to watch this band push through, and we're going to track that for you. And I got to put a forecast together for the 11th. So, guys, I'm going to try to shuffle my way out of here. But if there are any more questions, like Cutter said, hit us up on our own pages.
Yeah. So, Twitter, Facebook. You're going to be having the news at 11, the forecast?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Oh,
Very good.
You're very welcome, Emily.
There you go.
Yeah, and thanks for watching.
Yeah.
Friday night.
Thank you for watching
Friday
us. So I hope you enjoyed the WTOC Stormwatch 2018 and our question and answer here on all of our platforms, Roku, our Amazon, Fire TV, our WTOC Facebook page, and at WTOC.com. And if you have any more questions, again, just let us know, and we will be answering those here, especially if you leave this comment right here on the WTOC First Alert Weather app on this little page right here, this thread. Strand of this thread.
Troll it.
The good old conversation.
Thread.
Please do. Thumbs up, Rich.
There you go.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.